Veeam Backup and Replication offers seriously powerful NAS backup. And in this video, we're going to take a deep dive into the configuration of the backup jobs, as well as showcase some restore options we have for those NAS file shares. In order to start protecting those NAS workloads, let's take a look at the configuration needed in order to create those backup jobs. If we navigate to the inventory pane here on the lower left-hand side, we'll see the file shares option where we can either A, add a file share, B, create a backup job of those file shares, or C, restore data, files, and folders from those backup files. Now we already have one created, a share that is, and that's going to be an SMB. And if I drill into the properties, we can see its location, any credentials if they were needed, as well as how we're going to process that data. Now, the proxy is the heavy lifter, if you will, of the equation. And by default, we're going to use any and all proxies with some intelligence to ensure that we're being as efficient as possible. You can then scale up or scale down the backup IO control with a simple slider here, or go in and choose which proxies will be a part of that NAS backup. Now, again, by default, it is all proxies, and you do get one by default when you install the Veeam software. So you may not need to configure this if the environment doesn't see needed. Now, going through, speaking of those proxies, we can look at our backup infrastructure tab, which not only has the proxies, but also repositories, which we'll talk about here in just a quick moment. The proxies themselves, specific to the file shares, are simple Windows machines. And again, you have one by default, but we can add an additional one, scaled out to as many as you need, as we see fit. So if I choose a file proxy, it'll ask us to simply choose a server, again a Windows machine, in the environment that will take advantage of that task. We'll go and assume max concurrent tasks. Essentially, that's going to be one concurrent task per CPU core. The rest of this wizard is just a quick walkthrough, such as traffic rules, some throttling, and encryption. So you can set those as needed for your environment. Now, if I hit cancel, just to leave this window, it allows us to navigate to the various repository types that you have at your disposal. So going through, if I right click and add a backup repository, you'll notice a list of options we have here. And now each one of these options do expand into more. So I do recommend visiting veeam.com and checking out our repository videos so you can see the different options that are there. One quick shout out would be the last option you see here of object storage, where I can minimize my dependency of on-premises storage by tiering my backups off to that cheaper cloud storage. Now, going through, once we have our repositories in place, maybe a proxy in place, now we can create those backup jobs and protect those NAS workloads. The backup jobs themselves are wizard driven as well. And we'll pick on one that's already been set up in our lab here by right-clicking and hitting edit. Now again, this being a quick wizard, we just give it a name and description. That way it's easy to find within our various jobs in our list there. And the next step is going to be selecting the files and folders that we would like to be protected. Now again, we can select the entire NAS if need be, but if you do want to create multiple jobs aimed at specific portions or files or folders of that NAS, more than welcome to. We can go through, add, remove, and as I add them, it's a simple drop-down menu, super easy to find what you're needing to protect. Once I've made those elections, all I need to do is tell it where it's going to be sent. Here we'll have our exagrid. You may see in yours a default repository, which will actually be the local disk of the machine that you're running Veeam on. This is going to be our short-term retention. Here in this example, we're keeping for 28 days, as well as keeping longer versions, archiving, if you will, out to a secondary repository. In this example, it's going to be our object repository, and doing that for 1 year. Now with the short-term and the potential use of the long-term archives, we can also add a secondary target in the following step. So if we add a secondary repository, this is going to get additional copies of those backup files that are landing on that primary repository. So this just gives us a more redundant copy of our short-term retention. The next step is the familiar scheduling. So by default, we're going to run the job at 10 p.m. every day, but we can make adjustments as we see fit, down to every hour or every minute if need be. And then we have options like retries, which I do recommend having this checkbox. If by chance we lose connection, we'll retry that 3 times before we send you a notification about that job failure. So once this job kicks off initially, we're going to capture a full backup. We're also going to mimic and take a lot of those characteristics that we saw from those virtual machine backup jobs and capture incrementals as we build this retention. So as we build that job kicks off, we capture some metadata that allows us to compare in future runs and only back up the changes that have occurred since that previous run. So what we'll do is we'll put this at the defaults and make it run daily at 10 p.m. Now, let's fast forward 3 days. We've had a full with 2 incremental runs following it, and maybe we need to get some data out of it. In order to start those recoveries, just go to my backup section here, and under disk, which will be my local repository, and then it'll showcase that backup job that has the NAS backup. Now, if I right-click on the shared folder and hit restore, it's going to showcase a handful of options that apply to this particular backup file. One, I can restore the entire file share. This is going to be a fresh write of the entire backup file, or I can roll back to a point in time. It's just a handful of days ago. I can use those incrementals and that metadata to very efficiently get back to a particular point in time. Now, if I jump into files and folders, this may look quite familiar and immediately get some confidence into these restore capabilities. Files and folders will then open up a new window, allowing us to dive into that backup file and get individual folders and files out. Not only that, we can look at the most recent backup file by default, you'll see here in the ribbon, or I can go all time and even go selected, which will then allow me to pull open a specific date to gain that data back. So we'll go back to latest, drop this folder down, and I can get back to something that's important to me and right click and conduct those restores. Now, you would think that we're just going to overwrite or drop that file in place, but if you want to keep what's in production and allowing you to make that educated decision after the fact, we have that option as well. Now, these restores, whether it's granular or getting the entire NAS back, is very, very simple and is an amazing way to ensure that those NAS file shares are protected properly. If you enjoyed watching this video, be sure to check out Veeam.com for other overview and tutorial videos on Veeam Backup and Replication, along with our agents, Office 365. Thanks for tuning in and have a wonderful day.